The science behind climate change has equipped us with enough evidence by now to demand real and effective climate action. I'm not going into the climate impact here because you've seen it, and we've already seen it with long-term drought, desertification, flash flooding, and more extreme weather events. The predictions are that these are all going to happen more often to the detriment of well-being and environment. This crisis, this emergency, however, doesn't seem to attract enough attention. At least I see that there is still a very large gap between words and effective and holistic action. The last assessment in 2020 from the European Commission on Malta's National Energy and Climate Plan draws a bleak picture of Malta, indicating it does not intend to meet its non-ETS greenhouse gas emission reduction targets domestically because of limited mitigation potential and high mitigation costs. It also talks about the unexploited emission reduction potential for transport and buildings. And Malta remains unambitious also in the renewable energy sector. We need much more ambition than this. The latest data for Malta shows a decline in the overall emissions because, of course, of the changeover to gas. However, the picture is not so rosy when it tackles transport emissions, which have continued to rise since the 1990s. And of course, we see also the rising new threat since 2003 of fast-growing emissions from industrial processes, which are becoming a major concern. Here, the contribution comes from the uptake of refrigeration and air conditioning equipment that emit hydrofluorocarbons, which have a high global warming potential. But I'm not here to talk about buildings and air conditioning. There are others who will. I'm here to talk about transport, its impacts, and the need for a revolution in the way we think about transport and mobility. The policy approach we have taken so far has been one which adopts most of the time, without any questioning, a predicted growth in the economy and transport activity, 4%, and implements road infrastructure projects to provide for that growth. We do not question whether that growth is sustainable. We do not question whether we need that growth. And we have simply and continue to simply refuse to consider the possibility that we would not need to travel more, or that alternatives to the car can easily, more effectively, and more sustainably provide for these needs. Indeed, this stubbornness to build more and more roads, consume more and more of our precious land resources, and degrading our quality of life will be our downfall. And as a bad example for others in the world. And therefore, we continue to try and negotiate through excuses of smallness and necessary growth in GDP, and pay for our exceedances in CO2 emission to spite others, but eventually to spite ourselves. COVID has provided us with some fresh perspectives, at least for those that sought to think ahead rather than tirelessly work to go back to the past as quickly as possible. Let's look at these perspectives as opportunities on how we manage the future of transport, be ambitious, and why not revolutionize transport. First one is we have now new patterns of consumption, activity, and mobility. Many of us can telework some days of the week. We make use of deliveries more often. And overall, I think we have come to realize that we don't need to consume so many things anymore. For transport planning, these new patterns shift a lot of things around and provide us with an opportunity to think differently about, for example, walking and cycling in our towns and villages, the use of shared and public transport systems, and of the car. After all, we all saw the great benefits of improved air quality, lower noise levels, less time wasted in congestion, and less unnecessary trips over the past year and a half. Number two, politicians have always feared resistance to change, translated into political suicide, and therefore a barrier to do anything. Not anymore. The pandemic has shown that people can and do adapt quickly when challenged with a crisis. Therefore, I see no more excuses. The so-called difficult decisions in moving transport to more active travel, to give priority to public transport and restrictions on the use of the car have to happen. We simply cannot keep on beating about the bush and expect technology to solve the problem by itself. Like, for example, the promise of electrification. Number 3, the pandemic lockdown has also somehow reconnected us to our neighborhoods, and this is a good thing. Communities are stronger in demanding the change that is required. We might not have been able to pull together a protest like the Central Link protest a couple of years ago, but we can use that energy to demand better environments and more sustainable transport alternatives for our community. With this in mind, I urge individuals, communities, local and national politicians to look beyond what we have to what we can achieve. A sustainable transport system is one that gives priority to people and efficient modes of transport, not cars. I'm not saying cars and infrastructure to support them shouldn't be there. But we now need to refocus on what is sustainable so that we can truly achieve emission reductions in transport. And how do we achieve this? Well, these are some of my thoughts. We need parking management. I've been saying this for a while. Sorry for the repetition. We need to manage our road environments better. We need to give the space back to people so they can feel comfortable to walk rather than take the car to the local grocer, pharmacy, or local restaurants. This shift to active travel will not happen if we fill our streets with an unmanaged number of parked cars, pushing people to walk dangerously close to moving cars. Once we have started managing our street environment and provide people with space to walk, we can start looking at connections between places by public transport. Access to bus stops will be easier and safer, and using the bus will not be considered difficult. Don't underestimate how many people are afraid to walk to the bus stop. We need to prioritize the bus over traffic so that the main criticism of the bus, which is unreliability, can be resolved. A bus removes 30 to 40 cars from the road, and on certain corridors, it deserves a dedicated lane so it can move faster. The embarrassing example of the failed bus lane in Imbriha should be a lesson for us all. Indeed, now all bus lanes have become a failure due to systematic removal or simply lack of enforcement. And all this for just a few kilometers of roads out of over 2,600 kilometers of road in this little island. We need to think about an even more ambitious mass transport system. Yes, a bus rapid transportation system, a BRT, is an effective and cheap mass transport system that can be implemented in a very short period of time. I believe there are already very good proposals for some BRT lines that could cut down travel times by bus and reduce congestion in some of our major town centers. But we keep resisting this low-hanging fruit for reasons that are beyond me. Once we tackle these, we can start looking at a transport ecosystem, which is fair and just and provides for people to move rather than cars, one which allows for walking, cycling, micromobility, shared and public transport to operate with serenity. Then we can start looking at the changing patterns of mobility. And what we will notice is that where good infrastructure for active travel is provided, people will make use of it. Once a good proportion of our population has become adapted to new patterns of mobility, then we can be even more ambitious. Think of light rail systems that are faster, more expensive to run and maintain, but which require a very high number of users and longer implementation times. Malta is a small to medium-sized city by any definition, and we need to understand that our environment provides us with limitations. This is not to say that we cannot be ambitious, but we need to be careful not to undermine the environment with projects that require large infrastructure investment, are high cost and high maintenance, and have the potential of affecting our resources, both above and below ground. And would take too long to implement, to the detriment of other, easier and more effective solutions. I'm afraid that if we start running without having walked first, and we rely too much on single mega projects to solve all problems, which, by the way, do not exist, we fall into a downward spiral of denial, delay, and eventually downfall. There are some very good examples of this downfall from abroad, so we should learn from them. In conclusion, whilst we talk about transport every single day in this island, our handling of what is necessary is very much like the elephant in the room. The much needed measures to move towards a more sustainable transport, supported, yes, by a sustainable mass transport system, one that is to our scale and environment, are there. Not impossible to implement, but require political championing. And just like Malta was among the first in the world to implement road pricing, for example, with the CVA in Valletta, and to deliver on transport solutions that have supported the city, like the park and ride, the pedestrianization examples, the lifts and the ferries, then we can also lead on other successful transport measures. Yes, these are difficult decisions and difficult projects to implement, but with a positive outlook, a strong political champion, proper evidence in support of projects, extensive public consultation and engagement, and full transparency as to the impacts and benefits, I am sure we can succeed. We did in the past, others do it all the time abroad, and I see absolutely no reason to think we cannot achieve it here as well.